And good evening, it's Ken Kraetzer for CaMMVetsMedia. We cover cadets, midshipmen, the military, and veterans proudly since 2008. Glad to have my colleague, Jack McGuirk, with us tonight. Jack, how are you?
Doing very well. Happy to be here. How are you doing?
Good, good. This is sort of a start of a new era for us. For nearly 15 years, I think we would have been 15 years in November. We had been doing our show on WVOX 1460 in Rochelle, New York, telling the story of veterans and military and college football, little college basketball, but a lot of West Point stories. But unfortunately, after 55 years, WVOX ceased operations just after Labor Day.
Mhm.
And certainly unfortunate. Certainly the legacy of the founder, Bill O'Shaughnessy, who passed away a year ago. They couldn't find a way to keep it going, at the level that Bill O'Shaughnessy would have liked to see it. So unfortunately, WVOX is no longer, but we are going to continue to do what we do, which is covering the military and covering veterans and talking about issues and trying to explain the military to the public, and also many events at West Point. In fact, we'll be up there Thursday night for the presentation of the Thayer Award to former Secretary Elizabeth Dole, and then we'll be covering Army football at Syracuse on Saturday. So a lot happening, and Jack is keeping a close eye on what's happening with the military and veterans. So Jack, what are your stories tonight?
All right, I'm going to start off with what's happening in Ukraine. Russia launched an attack on Ukraine's border regions, including the agricultural facilities near Odessa. Russia stepped up its attacks in the areas after withdrawing from the Black Sea grain deal, which ensured safe passage for vessels. Ukraine being the breadbasket of Europe, so that's a big producer of grain is Ukraine. The Pentagon announced a new $600 million package of long-term aid to Ukraine last week, providing funding for an array of weapons and other equipment. This is just a day after the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, visited Ukraine and pledged $1 billion in new military and humanitarian aid. Now, the Defense Department said the latest package will come through the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, and included in the aid is funding for equipment to sustain and integrate Ukraine's air defense systems, ammunition for the high mobility artillery rocket systems. We've talked about those a lot on the show. Artillery rounds, electronic warfare and counter electronic warfare equipment, demolition munitions, and mine clearing equipment, as well as for training and maintenance. Blinken had said he was in Ukraine that the Pentagon would provide about $175 million for weapons that will be pulled from Pentagon stocks, and an additional $100 million in grants to allow Ukrainians to purchase arms and equipment. In addition, the U.S. announced it will send nearly $805 million in non-arms related aid to Ukraine, including $300 million for law enforcement, $206 million in humanitarian aid, $203 million to combat corruption, and $90 million for removing mines, the State Department said. And the package also includes a previously announced $5.4 million to transfer to Ukraine of frozen assets from Russian oligarchs. So big aid package there heading to Ukraine.
Yes, it's badly needed by the Ukraine military, and it's a question of is it what Ukraine really needs right now to move forward. General Mark Milley was interviewed on Fareed Zakaria's show on Sunday and was asked about providing advanced fighter aircraft, F-16s, to the Ukraine military. And he basically answered by describing how long it takes to provide sophisticated military equipment in terms of logistics and training, so that it can be used effectively. And some of that's already been delivered and being used. But that is the big question: is when Ukraine will get access to F-16s. It looks like some F-16s that have been in the air forces of several NATO countries are going to be made available to Ukraine once they have pilot training concluded, which apparently takes about a year to train a pilot to fly an F-16. So we'll see, but the war seems to be a bit of a standoff now, with the Russians having dug a fairly effective set of trenches and posted mines, but the amount of artillery fire at each other is immense. And Tom Friedman wrote an article Sunday in the New York Times, and he said, gosh, the Russians are having to go to North Korea to get more armament, more supplies of artillery shells and whatnot, and how degrading that is for Russia to have to go to North Korea to ask for assistance. But we'll see. It seems like it's a standoff. The Ukrainians have about 6 weeks more of being able to fight on dry land before the winter sets in. So we'll see. See if we can get. I'd love to have our friend Dan Rice call and give us a report, and see if we can reach out to Dan, who's a West Point grad, re-enlisted in the Army after 9/11, served overseas, worked on the rehabilitation of the Thayer Hotel and the Thayer Leadership Group, and worked very closely with the Ukraine military, and became the president of the university in Kiev. So a lot to watch, and concerns by many in Europe about what happens what's the impact on American support for Ukraine given the election next year.
Indeed. And there was a meeting in Norway near Oslo of defense chiefs from NATO countries meeting there in Norway to discuss what's happening in Ukraine. A group led by U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, and General Milley, the aforementioned General Milley, was there as well. And they were discussing the relationship with North Korea and Russia. There was actually Kim Jong-un recently visited Russia, and there was video of him looking at fighter jets and having a tour there while he was there. But you touched on this idea of Russia getting artillery and arms from North Korea. And it was General Milley said that they will probably lead North Korea to provide Soviet-era 152 millimeter artillery rounds to Moscow. But Milley said he's not really sure what big an impact that deal with North Korea would have on Ukraine. He's kind of saying, it might not be that big a deal as people are making it out to be. But he did say, continued that there's a need for more weapons and equipment in Ukraine, that allies and partners will be discussing and how to address that. Also, Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, is coming to the United States, visiting Washington, visiting Congress, and he's also going to be speaking at the UN General Council here in New York, probably asking for more aid. So we'll have to keep an eye on that.
When is that coming up? I know the UN has its meetings of foreign leaders in September, and that's always notable for the amount of traffic clogging it creates in New York City and Manhattan.
Yeah, I think it might actually be this week. So yeah, so we'll keep an eye on that. Speaking of North Korea fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles toward its eastern seas on Wednesday. Its neighbors said the launch came as I mentioned, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was traveling to Russia to visit with Vladimir Putin. And South Korea's Joint Chief Staff said it detected the missiles being fired 10 minutes apart from an area in Sunan, the site of Pyongyang's international airport, and that the weapons flew across the country towards the country's eastern seas. So North Korea continuing with these missile launches and tests of ballistic missiles.
Very dangerous. And one day, one of those missiles is going to hit Japan or South Korea or Vietnam, which is now a U.S. ally. And what's going to happen then? So very dangerous activity by North Korea. I'll be curious to see what China's policy is towards North Korea. They consider North Korea kind of a protectorate, or I don't know if you know what word to use it, but they're sort of they've been protected by China. But does China really want a country that's launching missiles all on a regular basis just below its border? It's China could end up being the influence on North Korea that reduces this show of military force that North Korea keeps presenting to the world.
Another interesting story with North Korea. North Korea said it has launched a purported nuclear attack submarine that it has been developing for years. Now, North Korea's official Korean Central News Agency said the vessel named Hero Kim Kun-ok is designed to launch tactical nuclear weapons from underwater, but didn't specify the number of missiles it could carry and fire. Now, based on Kim Jong-un's comments and photos by North Korean state media, it's likely the new submarine was the same one Kim inspected in 2019, which was under construction, which experts then asserted as an effort to convert an existing Romeo-class submarine. Now, the submarine appears to have at least 10 launch tubes, 4 of them larger than the other 6 that are possibly designed for ballistic and cruise missiles for their launches. North Korea has previously been testing a variety of missiles designed to be fired from submarines as it pursued an ability to conduct nuclear strikes from underwater, which in theory would bolster its deterrent by ensuring a survivable capability to retaliate after absorbing a nuclear attack on land. Now, North Korea, I didn't know this about North Korea, it has an estimated about 70 to 90 diesel-powered submarines in one of the world's largest submarine fleets, but they are mostly considered aging ones capable of launching only torpedoes, mines, and not missiles. But that's kind of a scary story with them possibly having a nuclear attack submarine. And we recently told the story that the U.S. has a nuclear submarine. I think it's the USS Ohio, one of the biggest nuclear submarines in the world, is in South Korea. So I'm sure they're keeping a close eye on this.
Yeah, well, having the Ohio there as a show of force, one of the original ballistic missile submarines in that class, and aging. But having one of those boomers in your vicinity should not make anyone comfortable as far as being an adversary. And there was a message being sent there. The question is, it's very unlikely the U.S. would use the Ohio, although it may have been retrofitted with mainly cruise missiles. I'm not sure if that's the case, but it has capacity to send off an awful lot of cruise missiles if it wants to, which is probably more likely to be used in the case that North Korea created an action that needed a response. But these diesel submarines, they're a problem because they're very quiet, but the technology level is not expected to be very high for North Korea, but they could do some damage. And the question is, would they align with China in terms of there was a conflict over Taiwan? And if they have a diesel submarine that is outfitted with nuclear weapons, well, I don't think the United States would allow that to become a blue water submarine. Mm-hmm. They would track it down and have it encircled by U.S. Navy ships or submarines. Should it attempt to go into the Pacific, much less get close to the U.S. mainland, that would be a very concerning thing for the U.S. Navy. What they would do if that submarine went approached Guam, perhaps, much less Hawaii. There's questions about the distance a submarine like that could sail, but it could sortie out towards Guam, and if it launched a missile, I mean, heaven help the North Koreans on that. What would happen? But destabilizes the world, destabilizes a volatile part of the world. There's enough tension between the US and China, much less having North Korea trying to tout what it can do. One story I was following that we want to keep a close eye on, we've watched for years on our show, is the new health record system that was installed for the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs, so that it would be a seamless connection when someone joined the military. They'd have a health record established, and that would survive be common across all the branches of service and the other groups that are under the Department of Defense. And then when someone retired, left the military, and they were eligible for the Department of Veterans Affairs services, their record would seamlessly transfer over with all their health records. And there was a hearing last week for the House Veterans Affairs Committee. Chairman is Congressman Mike Bost of Illinois, who we've talked to, and he continues to be concerned about the effectiveness of the new system. So I want to get more details on what his concerns. There have been issues with the pharmacy benefit. So anyone who's watching has experience with the new record system. Is it working? Is it not working? Please let us know. Jack, you got any more?
Oh, yeah. You mentioned China and Taiwan. Chinese warships and military aircraft surged toward Taiwan in a record show of force. This was last week, according to the Taiwan Ministry of National Defense. The Taiwan Ministry of National Defense. Now, officials in Taipei reported 103 Chinese aircraft and 9 Chinese Army Navy ships operating near the island within a 24-hour period from Sunday to Monday. The MND also issued a separate statement criticizing China for its patterns of military activity around Taiwan, saying that China's activities have posed severe challenges to the Taiwan Strait regional security and urged Beijing to stop these actions. Now, the Ministry of Defense reported that 40 of those 103 aircraft crossed the median line over the Taiwan Strait between China and Taiwan, or crossed into Taiwan's Southwest Air Defense Identification Zone. A map for them showed that the majority of the 40 aircraft carried out flights crossing the Southwest ADIZ, that zone, to enter and return from the Philippine Sea. The Ministry of Defense included a breakdown of the 40 aircraft, but that is a huge show of force from the Chinese.
Yeah, and when they violate Taiwanese airspace, it's a real problem. And the question is, does the United States do something similar? The United States has been sailing ships through the Taiwan Strait and having aircraft in the area. Yeah, if China keeps doing that, would they affect shipping of aircraft going into Taiwan or ships going in and out? Of course, Taiwan is a key producer of semiconductors. They make some of the most sophisticated semiconductors in the world right there in Taiwan that are needed by the United States and other countries. So the question, is that a first sign of the Chinese trying to blockade Taiwan? Mm-hmm. You had 9 Chinese ships that are going to stop or interfere with any freighters going into the country. Or is this just a prelude to the Chinese doing something like that? So we'll see. The U.S. Navy is concerned. There's an article in the New York Times which described how many anti-ship weapons China has accumulated along its coastline near Taiwan that could be used against the U.S. Navy or others should an active conflict ensue. And it's one of the things that you mentioned, the Ohio submarine, that the U.S. Navy and its submarines could be the most effective means of deterring China. And it's a question of, does China have land-based missiles that can attack submerged submarines? I don't know. one thing to attack a surface ship. It's pretty easy to spot, big radar signature. It's another thing to go after a submarine. That's off, a U.S. submarine, a Virginia class submarine, or an Ohio. That's off of the Taiwanese coast. So, and then there's all the unmanned weapons that may be used in a conflict like that we're seeing in the Ukraine. Jack, you have more for us?
Yeah, there was a nice ceremony at the White House last week. President Biden awarded the Medal of Honor to Captain Larry Taylor this is Tuesday, honoring the Army pilot who risked his life during the Vietnam War by flying into heavy enemy fire to save 4 members of a reconnaissance team from almost certain death as they were about to be overrun. That was on June 18th, 1968. Then First Lieutenant Taylor flew his Cobra attack helicopter to rescue the men after they had become surrounded by the enemy. Pitch black, no moon, no stars, no light beyond the glow of the cockpit, as they put it. And when he heard the whispering through the radio, Lieutenant Taylor heard that hearing, "We are surrounded." He knew the risks, but he was ready, and he arrived minutes at the site northeast of what is now Ho Chi Minh City, and asked the team to send up flares to mark their location in the dark. Taylor and a pilot in an accompanying helicopter started firing their ship's miniguns and rockets at the enemy, making low-level attack runs and braving intense ground fire for about half an hour. But with both helicopters nearly out of ammunition and the enemy continuing to advance, Taylor surveyed the team's intended escape route to a point near the river and concluded that the men would never make it, and he had to think of something else. And now, running low on fuel and almost out of ammunition himself, he directed his wingman to fire the rounds left in his minigun along the team's eastern flank and return to base camp while he fired his remaining rounds on the western flank. And he used the landing lights to distract the enemy, buying time for the patrol team to head south and east towards the new extraction point that had been identified. And after they arrived, Taylor landed a helicopter under heavy enemy fire at great personal risk. The 14 members were rushed toward the helicopter and clung to the exterior. Only had 2 seats, and Taylor whisked them away to safety. He was on the ground for about 10 seconds. That's how quickly this happened, but he was awarded the Medal of Honor. And it also reminded me this week, this Friday, 3rd Friday of September, is National POW MIA Remembrance Day. And there are still thousands of POWs and MIAs. I think the number, it's something like 70,000 MIAs still from World War II. So got to keep that in mind.
That's a good point by you, Jack. Yeah, a lot of those were lost at sea in World War II and are still considered obviously missing in action. They did not return home. I always think of my mother's class. Jack and I went to the same high school, Pelham Memorial High School, from the same town. And from my mother's class of 1938, there were 3 missing in action from one high school class. I know Jack went to another school. Where did you go to high school,
Yeah.
Jack?
I went to Fordham Prep.
You went to Fordham Prep. Okay. I'm sorry. I should have remembered that. But I know you had such a close connection with Pelham.
Yeah.
But there's even from Pelham, there's about 9 or 10 missing in action from World War II and from Vietnam. Actually, the remains of one Pelham native lost in Vietnam were identified a couple of years ago. So, okay, anything more? We're going to talk football for a minute before we break.
Yeah, well, I've got a couple of interesting stories from West Point. I don't know if you heard this one. There was a 200-year-old time capsule at West Point that was opened, and it seemed like there wasn't much in it, but actually there was some 6 silver American coins dating from 1795 to 1828 and a commemorative medal. Now the coins, it looked like it was a 1795 5-cent coin, an 1800 Liberty dollar, an 1818 25-cent coin, a 10-cent and 1-cent coins from 1827, an 1828 50-cent coin, and there was also an Erie Canal commemorative medal dating from 1826 that were found. This is at the base of a memorial which honors Revolutionary War hero Thaddeus Kossico. That was completed in 1829. A committee of 5 cadets, which included an 1829 graduate, Robert E. Lee, the same Robert E. Lee who was a Confederate general, was involved in the dedication of that monument. But an interesting piece of history with his time capsule up at West Point.
Well, West Point, yeah, that was, they didn't know what they were going to find in that. And it looked like when they first opened it up, there wasn't anything visible, deterioration to maybe some of the items over nearly 200 years, but they did find these coins, which is a neat find. And they're going to load up another time capsule for those at the Academy, 100 years or so from now to open up, and maybe something, maybe one of Jeff Monken's coins will end up in that time capsule. And as you mentioned earlier, big news from football side that Jeff Monken was signed to a contract extension. No terms announced, as they say, but college football coaches are paid in the millions of dollars, and in the multiple millions of dollars. That is something West Point has to do. They're able to pay key employees above military wages by having their own association, a 501c3, I believe it is, to be able to raise money to pay the salaries of extraordinary employees like Jeff Monken. And we're very happy for him. We've known him since the day he got there. Been great to work with us. And he's just done an amazing job. And of course, on Friday night, a huge win on the road in San Antonio at Texas. San Antonio 37-29. What were your thoughts about that one? I know we're going to talk more about it on our huddle on Tuesday night, but what was your view on that win by Army on Friday night?
That was a great game. I was at home watching it, and I thought, oh, University of Texas San Antonio, this might be, I don't know if it was going to be a tough game for Army or whatever, but they played great on the road there. Bryson Daly looks fantastic, and maybe as a result of this game, Coach Monken got that contract extension, which he signed, I believe, through the 2027 season.
Yeah, it's interesting that it happened. I'm sure something had been in the works. He had been a candidate for a couple of coaching jobs. He was a finalist at Kansas, and then he was, mentioned for the Northwestern job, and certainly a candidate for a Power 5 job. So Army has locked him up for a few more years, and he is going to be well compensated for that. And we're very happy that Coach Monken has decided to further commit to West Point, and could stay long enough to approach the record number wins of Coach Earl Blake from the 1930s and 1940s. And we'd love to see that, as well as, he's had tremendous success, beating Navy. The 2016 win over Navy to beat the 14-year losing streak was just amazing. And then following that up with 3 Commander-in-Chief Trophy wins and 2 visits to the White House. One year for 2020 when they won it, they couldn't get they couldn't set up a visit. So we're very happy for Coach Monken. We'll have more on that on our Tuesday night Army football huddle. Anything else major for you, Jack?
Well, I got some notes to talk a little bit about what happening with Navy and Air Force with their football
Okay,
season.
real quick.
Okay. Navy, they had a nice win. It was a loss, I should say. It's a close game, but they ultimately lost 28-24 against Memphis.
That's a good team. That's a competitive game for them.
And Air Force, they are undefeated, 3-0 now after a 39-21 win over Utah State. Navy actually has a bye week this weekend. They're going to be going down to Central Florida. They're hosting Central Florida the following weekend. And Air
Central
Force,
Florida was off their schedule. I didn't realize they would still play them.
yeah.
That's interesting that they're still on the schedule. I thought they had gotten a break with the teams leaving for the Big 12. Like Cincinnati and Houston. So I was surprised that's on the schedule, but they can enjoy that opportunity. And what about
Indeed.
Air Force? They won. Who'd they beat
Air
this
Force,
week?
they beat Utah State 39-21. They are undefeated. Previous week, they beat Sam Houston, not our colleague Colonel Sam Houston, but the school Sam Houston.
It's cool, yeah.
Yeah. And they're 3-0. They're doing really well. They're going to be heading down to San Diego State, but so far they're having a strong season. Well,
the question everybody's asking is how Air Force is handling the same rules that Army and Navy are with the elimination of downfield cut blocking, and basically eliminating most blocking downfield outside of the tackle box, because they have the same problem. I don't know. Did you see any of their game if they were using a shotgun, or they still have the quarterback under center?
I think they still have the quarterback under center. They do. They had 344 yards rushing in this game. They actually had two different guys who each had over 100 yards rushing. Owen Burke and Emmanuel Michel. Who is it? Owen Burke had 110 yards on 15 carries, and Emmanuel Michel had 106 yards on 28 carries. Michel also had 3 rushing touchdowns in the game. It was interesting. First score of the game was the rushing touchdowns, 1-yard carry for Emmanuel Michel, and then rather than kick a field goal, they just hand the ball off to him again, and he runs in for the 2-point conversion, giving Air Force an 8-0 lead on that after that first touchdown. Their running game is doing strong. Quarterback Zach Leary rushed for 56 yards in the game, had a 4-yard touchdown run, also passed for 84 yards in the game. So this team had a really strong run game, and also on defense, linebacker Alec Mock had 11 tackles. I think it's career high for him, 11 tackles there.
Okay. And very good. I want to see if I can bring in a, we're good. And see if we can, okay, we'll just hold on that. I want to mention we were out at the Brooklyn Wall of Remembrance, which is at Miami Park, home of the Brooklyn Cyclones, last Sunday night, actually. And for a 9/11 ceremony hosted by our good friend Saul Moglin.
Mm-hmm.
And Saul brought together quite a number of members of the Fire Department of New York and the New York City Police Department and 9/11 families. Also had several military heroes there. And we have the video, and it's up on our YouTube page, and we will connect that to this one. So you can watch the nice ceremony out at the Brooklyn Cyclones Park, the Brooklyn Wall of Remembrance. It's for those who haven't been there, it's photos on granite of 417 first responders who died in line of duty on 9/11. And it started out with just those from Brooklyn, and then Saul expanded it to cover all the heroes, first responders who were lost at the World Trade Center. It's hard to imagine that 22 years gone past, but many of the, quite a number of 9/11 families were present. A couple spoke, and it is so important for people to remember. And what Saul Moglin has done with this memorial is just extraordinary. We provide a little help, but Saul's also been a big part of our project to update the chaplains' monuments at Arlington National Cemetery. Kind of hit a roadblock. We want to add the names of 81 members of the Chaplains Corps who have died in service, going back to Korea and Vietnam for the Protestant Monument, and also names of chaplains that have died in Iraq and Afghanistan service to the Catholic and also to the Protestant Monument. So we'll have more updates on that, but it's good that we got our show reestablished. And Jack, again, a great job with your reports.
Mhm.
And so we're going to continue. Probably did about 700 shows on WVOX, talking about military and veterans and bringing in special guests. I'll never forget the time we had 3 lieutenant generals call in 3 weeks, and how extraordinary that was. General Swan, General Thompson, and General H.R. McMaster, all within a 3-week period last year. But Jack, you've been doing, really doing a great job, over a dozen years doing this. So we're glad we're going to be able to continue. We'll try to start bringing in some guests. We actually have more flexibility on time. We're not limited to, like 13-minute segments. We can go a little longer, as you always have material that you didn't get to. So anyway, we will be back next week. We'll also be back Tuesday night if you can follow for our Army football huddle. We'll break down Army's win over Texas San Antonio, a huge win for them. Really sets their season on a positive direction. And their visit next week up to the Carrier Dome and Syracuse University. That's going to be another difficult test, but brings back memories of Army games in the past against Syracuse. I haven't played them in about at least 15 years because they haven't played during the time we've been covering. And it's nice to be able to have a game where people can drive there. Syracuse from the West Point area is about 3.5 hours, so it's pretty drivable for people to get there. And I think that's a very positive part of college sports, when you can actually go and not have to get on a plane to go to a road game. Something that's being tested with this conference realignment. Also, got to mention that Army is in discussions about joining the American Conference.
Wow.
With the SMU pulling out, there's an open spot, and according to national analysts, I asked Coach Munkin about this last week. He would rather stay independent, but he said it may be a necessity. So they've gone from absolutely no way would they join a conference to, well, it may be inevitable and we may have to do it now, given the way college football is going. The challenge is scheduling. It's very tough, especially once a conference seasons get started, to schedule games because teams are in their conference schedules. And then also there's the TV money factor. But all of the reports say that the Army-Navy game would be maintained as a game played the week after the conference championships, which it's been for the past dozen or 15 years, giving the game focus and attention and a big audience. What someone brought up is, what happens if Army and Navy play in the American Conference Championship game the week before? What do you do to the Army-Navy game the week after? I mean, I guess you don't do all the traditions and pageantry. You don't have the full corps of cadets and the full brigade of midshipmen at the game. Maybe that's a good problem to have if it would show that both teams are playing very well. But that would be interesting if you had the Army versus Navy 2 weeks in a row. But we'll see. We'll see what happens in this crazy world of college football right now. The whole future of the Pac-12 is in doubt, and what's going to happen with the Mountain West Conference. And every time there's movement, it affects a whole lot of other conferences and teams. And what about the athletes? Being able to travel reasonable distances to get to games and competitions. It's not just the football teams that play once a week. It's the basketball teams, the volleyball teams, soccer teams, baseball teams having to travel. So it's a big factor. Jack, I gotta call it a night, but good job as always.
Alrighty. Thank you.
And so we're going to continue as our first effort post WVOX 1460 and Rochelle closing. So we're going to continue to do what we do, tell the story of cadets, midshipmen, the military and veterans right here on our social media channels. So for Jack McGuirk, thank you. This is Ken Kraetzer for CaMMVetsMedia. Thanks for watching.